Welcome! All patrons whose students attend a Granite District year-round elementary school have been invited to attend one of our 3 information meetings. These meetings are a step in our process to study year-round schools and their related schedules. Our objective is to gather your input prior to presenting a final recommendation to the Board of Education. At this meeting, you are invited to learn about and discuss the proposal to move all year-round schools to a traditional school schedule. The original objectives for having schools on a year-round schedule included to reduce crowding in schools which had outgrown their buildings, to increase the utilization of each building, and to postpone the construction costs of more schools which would have exceeded our building budget. In 1987, 5 selected schools started the year-round schedule, and in 1988, 5 more schools began the year-round schedule. Over the next 19 years, 8 more elementary schools and 2 junior high schools were added to the year-round schedule. The 18 elementary schools which adopted the year-round schedule have increased their student capacity by 20 to 25%. The student capacity increase saved the construction costs of building 4 to 5 new elementary schools. By not building more schools, millions of tax dollars were saved by avoiding the cost of operating new school buildings. One additional expense that was incurred was installing air conditioning needed during summer months for 17 of those schools. The 3 objectives for operating year-round schools were met. Crowding was alleviated, we maximized the use of the buildings, and there was a significant cost savings to Granite District taxpayers. This evening, we will analyze our remaining 14 year-round schools and ask these questions. How does year-round student achievement compare to schools on a traditional schedule? Do year-round schools continue to serve the original purpose to alleviate crowding? And are year-round schools cost-effective? Granite District uses a year-round schedule called the Modified 45-15 model. Students are in school, what we call on track, for about 9 weeks, and then taken off track for about 3 weeks. Our year-round schools are in session 172 days, while traditional schools are in session 180 days. The difference of those 8 instructional days is met by adding 20 minutes to each of the 172 days in session. Though the total instructional hours are the same, we realize that minutes may not always add up to the same experience of being in school for those 8 full days. When we compare the academic performance of traditional schools with year-round schools of similar demographics, we find that student achievement scores in our traditional schools tend to be higher than year-round schools. When all of the year-round schools are averaged and compared to similar traditional schools, the traditional school student proficiency growth is about 5% higher than the year-round schools. This chart shows student population over the past 4 years for each of the 14 year-round schools with their net change. 11 of the schools show a distinct decrease in student population. Granger shows minimal growth, Stansbury shows moderate growth, and Wilson shows growth due to the economics of affordable housing markets in their area. Overall, we recognize a shrinking population in these schools. We are not alarmed by this, we simply recognize that crowding is decreasing. There is an interesting concept which helps year-round schools increase capacity. This concept is called rotating. When a class finishes their session and they go off track, they actually move out of their classroom so the students who are coming on track can move into that classroom. When Teacher A moves out of Classroom 101 to go off track, Teacher B moves into that room. When Teacher A comes back on track, they will go to Room 105, where Teacher C is now vacating as they go off track. This cycle continues each transition during the whole year. This concept is important to understand because, as you will see from this chart, 10 of the 14 year-round schools no longer need to rotate in order to accommodate their students during transition times. In other words, when Class A goes off track, the teacher and students no longer need to move out of their room for the incoming students. Every teacher is able to stay in the same room and no one needs to rotate. That also means that the room sits empty when the class is off track. The conclusion for these 10 schools? They no longer need to be on the year-round schedule. There are 4 schools that must still rotate as off-track students come back on track. In a few minutes, we'll come back to those schools with a possible solution. Next, let's look at some of the expenses unique to operating year-round schools. This chart shows the additional costs needed to operate a year-round school. Now let's examine the columns left to right. There is a stipend paid to the principal for being the leader of a year-round school, as year-round schools operate 6 weeks longer than the traditional school. Next, there is an additional secretary in the front office to assist students, parents, and teachers as they go off track, on track, and during additional weeks of school. Because the summer cleaning time is short, the district outsources the cleaning of school carpets to help prepare the school as the students return right after the July 24 holiday. The school lunch personnel have additional costs because lunch operates an additional 6 weeks. That also increases the cost to operate the district's central kitchen longer each year. Buses and drivers add expenses to those additional 6 weeks too. The power expenses for operating the lights and air conditioning during the 6 weeks is listed also. The professional development column represents the average cost for substitute teachers to cover classes in August so the year-round teachers can attend professional development training. An even more substantial cost is special education coverage substitutes to cover resource classrooms when the special education teacher must go off track. Resource students are not collectively put on the same tracks. They are dispersed across all the tracks just like all other students are. But resource teachers must go off track and a substitute must come on and cover their resource class during those 3 weeks off. Now, let's look at the bottom line. The cost difference is substantial. Originally, this cost was well worth the expenses of the 4 to 5 schools we would have built had we not gone on the year-round schedule with those schools. But now, with so many schools not rotating and therefore not needing the year-round calendar, these are additional expenses for operating those schools year-round. In review, we have discussed how year-round academics are not showing better scores than students in traditional calendar schools. We have seen that the majority of the school populations are smaller than they used to be. Also, 10 of the schools do not need to rotate, and all of their students will adequately fit into their existing classrooms. From those facts, we now recognize that the year-round school system is now costing more rather than saving us precious education dollars. Our conclusion: the year-round school tactic has met its original purpose, and we should now consider returning the 14 year-round schools to a traditional school calendar. Let's also consider some other facts. Teachers like the schedule for the intermittent breaks. Some intersession interventions take place for off-track learners. Some parents like their students in school during the summer as they find the 3-week breaks less disruptive for their students. Here are some considerations for removing the 14 schools from the year-round calendar. Families with secondary students have 2 school schedules. There are multiple differing calendars for back-to-school night, school pictures, SEPs, fundraisers, PTA activities, and even the school community council elections need more than one calendar. We have also noted that some parents choose to avoid the year-round schedule by moving their children from their home school to a traditional calendar school. As pointed out earlier, there are financial costs of staying on the year-round schedule. In discussing with the principals of the 14 year-round schools what it would take to transition to the traditional schedule, they told us the 10 non-rotating schools would be an easy transition and should be done. The 4 rotating school principals said they could transition to the traditional schedule if they had additional teaching stations so everyone had their own classroom. School principals made a very excellent suggestion which we developed into this solution. Hillside and Valley Crest could make adjustments in teacher room assignments. With the addition of 1 relocatable classroom, they could transition to the traditional schedule. Granger would need 4 relocatable classrooms in order to make the traditional schedule work, and Stansbury would need 2 additional relocatables. This solution does have a cost of moving additional relocatables to these 4 schools, but these costs are minimal compared to the yearly savings we will gain by going off the year-round schedule. The 4 principals concur this would bring their faculty and students together at the same time, put everyone on a traditional schedule, eliminate multiple calendars, and strengthen their instructional approach to all students. Let's go back to the question where we started the presentation. How does year-round student achievement compare to similar traditional schools? The answer: students in traditional calendar schools, on average, are scoring higher. Does year-round continue to serve the original purpose to alleviate crowding and defer construction costs? The answer: no. The Board of Education is considering moving the 14 schools to the traditional schedule. They want to hear your response, which you can provide by filling out a comment card and leaving it in one of the deposit boxes here tonight. You may also provide feedback by clicking on a link on the district website. Thank you for being with us this evening. We look forward to reviewing your comments.